The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound for a long moment, a stark contrast to the boisterous laughter that had filled our Aspen vacation rental just seconds before. My brother-in-law, Mark, had just delivered his usual pronouncement, a thinly veiled jab at his wife, my sister, Eleanor. "She's useless without me," he declared, a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face as he gestured vaguely in her direction. Eleanor, bless her patient heart, simply sighed and took a sip of her Cabernet. She'd heard it a million times. We all had. But tonight was different. Tonight, I felt a peculiar hum in the air, a tingle of anticipation that had been building for weeks. I set down my fork, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. All eyes, including Mark's, turned to me. He probably expected me to join in the usual chorus of placating remarks, or perhaps to offer some sisterly solidarity to Eleanor. He didn't know. No one did. I took a deep breath, the crisp Colorado air filling my lungs. "Actually, Mark," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor of excitement in my chest, "that's not entirely true anymore." His smirk wavered. Eleanor looked up, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. My parents, sitting across from us, exchanged a bewildered glance. "Oh," Mark scoffed, recovering his composure. "And why's that, Cassie? Did you finally decide to invest in our company?" He put a patronizing emphasis on "our," as if to remind me of the countless times he'd belittled my own career, my little art gallery in Santa Fe, as he called it. A slow smile spread across my face. This was it. The moment I'd been rehearsing in my head for months. "Not exactly, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the room. "I just sold it." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just the clinking of silverware that stopped. It felt like time itself had paused. Mark's jaw went slack. His eyes, usually so arrogant, were wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Eleanor's wine glass clattered against the table, a tiny splash of red wine blooming on the pristine white tablecloth. My father, a usually stoic man, actually gasped. I let the words hang in the air, watching their faces, each one a canvas of unfolding emotion. The years of patronizing comments, the dismissive waves of his hand whenever I spoke of my own successes, the casual cruelty he inflicted on Eleanor. It all condensed into this single satisfying moment. The view from the dining room window, a breathtaking panorama of snow-capped peaks, seemed to intensify, the silent grandeur mirroring the shift in power that had just occurred within these four walls. Part 2. Mark was the first to speak. His voice a strangled croak. You sold it. My company. You can't. That's impossible." He pushed away from the table, knocking his chair back with a loud thud that echoed in the quiet room. He looked at Eleanor, then at our parents, as if for confirmation that I was somehow playing a cruel joke. Their faces, however, offered no such solace, only bewildered shock. "Oh, but I can, Mark," I replied, my voice still calm, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm brewing in his eyes. "Remember that little clause in the trust Grandpa set up? The one that gave me joint ownership and, crucially, the right to sell if certain financial benchmarks weren't met for 3 consecutive quarters." He stared at me dumbfounded. The trust, course. Grandpa Elias, bless his shrewd old soul, had always been wary of Mark's lavish spending and impulsive decisions. He'd structured the family investments with a series of intricate safeguards, much to Mark's annoyance over the years. We all knew about the trust, but Mark, in his infinite arrogance, had clearly never bothered to truly understand its intricacies. Or perhaps he just never believed I'd be bold enough to actually use them. "Those benchmarks, Mark," I continued, leaning forward slightly, enjoying the palpable tension in the room, "haven't been met in over a year. Your little expansion projects in Dubai and the Cayman Islands, while certainly glamorous, have been hemorrhaging money. And since you refused to even discuss a change in strategy, I had no choice." Eleanor, finally finding her voice, gasped. "Cassie, what are you talking about? What company?" She looked between me and Mark, her brow furrowed in confusion. The company Eleanor, I explained gently, that Mark always bragged about. His empire. The one that was actually built on Grandpa's initial investments and was supposed to provide for all of us. I turned back to Mark, whose face was now a fascinating shade of puce. It was a clean sale. A very tidy profit, actually, thanks to a few shrewd maneuvers I made in the background over the last few months. The new owners are taking over next week. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the dining table, his knuckles white. You manipulative. You snake. How dare you? His voice was a guttural roar, filled with a rage that finally broke the silence. My father, recovering from his initial shock, finally intervened. Mark. Enough. He stood up, placing a hand on my brother-in-law's arm. But Mark shrugged him off, his gaze fixed on me, venomous. This is your revenge, isn't it? He spat, his voice trembling. For all those times I told you your art was a hobby, your gallery a little plaything. You just wanted to destroy what I built. I met his glare with a calm, unwavering gaze. You didn't build it, Mark. Grandpa did. You merely inherited it, and then proceeded to run it into the ground with your ego and your recklessness. This isn't about revenge. This is about protecting our family's future, something you were clearly incapable of doing. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with years of resentment finally brought to the surface. Eleanor, pale and shaken, pushed her chair back, looking from me to her furious husband. The aspen air, so fresh moments ago, suddenly felt heavy, thick with the weight of shattered illusions and a newly forged reality. Part 3. Mark stood there, breathing heavily, his face a mask of impotent fury. He looked like a cornered animal, all bluster and no escape. Eleanor, meanwhile, seemed to be piecing together years of subtle clues and dismissive remarks from Mark. Her initial shock was giving way to a dawning comprehension, and with it, a quiet devastation. But our accounts, Eleanor stammered, looking at Mark, her voice barely a whisper. You said everything was fine. More than fine, even. You just bought that new vintage car, the one you said was an investment for our future. Mark flinched as if slapped. The vintage car. Yeah. The endless business trips that were more luxury vacations. It all came flooding back, each extravagant purchase a nail in the coffin of Grandpa Elias's legacy. I stepped in, my gaze softening as I looked at Eleanor. He was lying to you, Eleanor. He's been draining the company for years to fund his lifestyle. I only found out the full extent of it a few months ago when I finally got a complete audit done. The company was on the brink of collapse. If I hadn't stepped in, you would have lost everything. My words hung in the air, a stark and undeniable truth. Mark suddenly looked smaller, his bluster deflating like a punctured balloon. The grand illusion he'd so carefully constructed, the image of the successful, indispensable businessman, was shattering before our eyes. My father, who had been listening intently, finally cleared his throat. Mark, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Is this true? Mark avoided his gaze, staring at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug. He opened his mouth, then closed it, no denial forming. The silence that followed was the most damning admission of all. Eleanor slowly walked around the table, her eyes never leaving Mark. The love, the trust, the shared history. It was all being reevaluated, recontextualized, in the harsh light of this new reality. She reached him, not to comfort him, but to simply stand there, observing him as if for the very first time. The quiet strength I'd always admired in my sister was radiating from her, a calm resolve that promised a reckoning far more profound than my own. The Aspen vacation rental, once a haven of family gatherings and laughter, had become a crucible. The scent of pine and crisp mountain air now carried the tang of betrayal and the promise of a future irrevocably altered. Outside, the last rays of the Colorado sunset painted the peaks in fiery hues, a dramatic backdrop to the quiet implosion unfolding within. Part 4. The silence in the dining room stretched, thick and suffocating. Eleanor's gaze on Mark was unblinking, analytical. It was the look of someone recalculating a lifetime. Mark finally broke, not with more rage, but with a pathetic whine. "Eleanor, don't look at me like that. It was just a temporary setback. I was going to fix it, I swear." Eleanor, however, seemed to be miles away, her mind replaying countless conversations, small lies and dismissive gestures. "Temporary setback," she finally said, her voice chillingly calm. "You told me we needed to pull Leo out of his private school for a more grounded experience. You said we should sell the cabin by the lake because it was too much upkeep. You made me believe I was being wasteful, Mark, when all along it was you." My heart ached for my sister. She had always been the more trusting, the more forgiving one. To see that trust so utterly shattered was far more devastating than any financial loss. My mother, who had been silently weeping into a napkin, finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Mark, how could you? Grandpa Elias worked his entire life for that company. He built it for all of us, for the children, for their future." Mark finally looked up, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally, a way out. There was none. The comfortable, familiar world he had built on lies was crumbling around him. The pristine white tablecloth, once a symbol of our festive family dinner, now seemed to highlight the stark reality of his deceit. I stepped forward, placing a hand on Eleanor's arm. "Eleanor, the good news is, the sale price was substantial. And since the trust specifically states the funds are for the beneficiaries, your share and Leo's are secure. More than secure, actually. Enough to give you a fresh start, without any of Mark's management." Eleanor's head snapped towards me, a glimmer of something akin to hope flickering in her eyes. Mark, on the other hand, let out a choked sound, a mixture of disbelief and utter defeat. He looked from me to Eleanor, then back again, the implications of my words sinking in. Not only had I sold his company, but I had also secured Eleanor's financial independence from him. His carefully constructed web of control had been meticulously unraveled. The magnificent view of the snow-capped mountains outside seemed to mock his sudden helplessness, their majestic silence amplifying the resounding crash of his world. The air, once thick with tension, now carried a faint scent of freedom, of new beginnings, and of a very different kind of family dinner yet to come. Eleanor looked at me, a silent conversation passing between us. It was a look of gratitude, yes, but also of a dawning strength, a quiet resolve I hadn't seen in her for years. Mark, meanwhile, finally collapsed into his chair, looking utterly defeated, his earlier bluster replaced by a chilling silence. The air in the room, once thick with tension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of consequences unfolding. I need a moment," Eleanor said, her voice still quiet but firm. She turned and walked out of the dining room, her footsteps light on the polished wooden floor. We heard the soft click of a door closing upstairs, leaving the three of us, myself, Mark, and our parents, in a strained quiet. My mother, now composed but with red-rimmed eyes, looked at Mark with a profound sadness. "Mark," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "how could you do this to Eleanor? To your own family?" He just shook his head, avoiding her gaze, his face still a sickly pale. He looked utterly lost, like a child who had finally been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookies were a multi-million-dollar company and a family's financial security. My father, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. "Cassie," he said, turning to me, "what exactly does this mean for?" "Everything. For Mark." "For Mark," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "It means he's no longer employed by the company. He has no claim to its assets. And as for the money he siphoned off, well, that's a legal matter for the new owners to pursue if they choose. I've provided them with all the documentation from my audit. I chose not to mention the quiet agreement I'd made with the new buyers. They wouldn't pursue criminal charges if Mark stayed far away from the company, a small mercy for Eleanor's sake." Mark let out a strangled sound, a mix of despair and indignation, but he offered no argument. He knew he was trapped. He knew his house of cards had finally toppled. The evening that had begun with festive anticipation had descended into a harsh reality. The beautiful Aspen rental, designed for comfort and connection, now felt like a sterile courtroom. Outside, the stars began to pepper the darkening sky, vast and indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. The quiet of the mountains held the weight of a family irrevocably changed, on the cusp of a future where some would rise, and others would undoubtedly fall. An hour later, the silence in the dining room remained unbroken, save for the occasional rustle of my parents exchanging worried glances. Mark hadn't moved, seemingly paralyzed by the weight of his unraveling world. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally been unveiled. The air still felt heavy, but now it was the weight of consequences, not of suppressed lies. Suddenly, Eleanor reappeared, descending the grand staircase. Her eyes, though still a little red, held a newfound clarity, a steely resolve that replaced the earlier shock and sadness. She carried a small, worn leather-bound journal in her hand. She walked directly to Mark, who flinched as she approached. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse. Instead, her voice was low, steady, and devastatingly calm. "I just spent the last hour going through our finances. Every single statement, every invoice, every investment you told me about." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "And I found this." She held up the journal. Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of fear replacing his defeated expression. It was clear he recognized it. "This," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a quiet power, "is Grandpa Elias's journal. The one he kept detailing all the initial investments, the company's true value, and more importantly, his intentions for it. He meticulously documented every single penny, Mark, and every single recipient." She opened the journal to a page, her finger tracing a line. "He wrote here, clear as day, that a portion of the company's profits was to be set aside, untouchable, for Leo's education and future. Not for your private jets, not for your vintage cars, and certainly not for your secret gambling debts." My mother gasped a small, choked sound. Gambling debts. That was a new revelation, even to me. Mark visibly recoiled, his face paling even further. The air grew colder, if that were possible. Eleanor closed the journal with a decisive thud. "I'm not going to fight you, Mark. There's nothing left to fight for. I've already spoken to a lawyer, a very good one, who confirmed everything Cassie said about the trust. My share and Leo's are secure. I'm taking Leo, and we're moving back to Santa Fe, close to Cassie." She glanced at me, a fleeting, grateful smile gracing her lips. "I want a divorce." The finality of her words echoed in the silent room, more powerful than any shout. Mark's head snapped up, his mouth agape. The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen. The luxury Aspen rental, with its grand fireplace and breathtaking views, suddenly felt like a tomb for his old life. The silence that followed was not just from shock, but from the irreversible breaking of a bond. Outside, the vast, indifferent expanse of the Rocky Mountains stood as a silent witness to the end of an era. The days that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, legal consultations, and the quiet, efficient dismantling of a life. Eleanor moved with a newfound purpose, a calm determination I hadn't seen in her for years. Mark, on the other hand, remained largely a ghost in the Aspen house, confined to his room. His silence punctuated by the occasional angry murmur or the clink of ice in a glass. The once vibrant vacation home felt like a temporary holding cell, waiting for the inevitable. Within a week, Eleanor and Leo were packed. Leo, blissfully unaware of the financial earthquake that had just rocked his world, was excited about the prospect of living closer to Aunt Cassie and exploring a new city. Eleanor handled his innocent questions with grace, promising him new adventures and a fresh start. My parents, heartbroken by the unraveling of their daughter's marriage but relieved by her newfound strength and financial security, helped with the logistics, offering quiet support and endless cups of tea. The morning of their departure was crisp and clear, The kind of perfect aspen day that made you feel anything was possible. Mark finally emerged from his room, looking disheveled and hollow-eyed. He tried to speak to Eleanor to plead to somehow reverse the tide, but she simply shook her head, a quiet resolve in her eyes. "It's over, Mark," she said, her voice firm. "And it's for the best. For all of us." As Eleanor and Leo drove away, the familiar SUV shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the satisfaction of seeing justice served. It was the profound relief of knowing my sister, for the first time in a long time, was truly free. Months turned into a year. Eleanor and Leo thrived in Santa Fe. My gallery, once a little plaything in Mark's eyes, became a central part of Eleanor's new life. She discovered a hidden talent for art curation, her discerning eye and calm demeanor making her an invaluable partner. The funds from the trust, combined with her newfound purpose, allowed her to truly flourish. Leo, too, adapted beautifully, excelling in his new school and spending weekends exploring the vibrant art scene and stunning landscapes of New Mexico with his mom and me. Our family dinners were once again filled with laughter, but this time it was genuine, unburdened by secrets or unspoken resentments. As for Mark, the silence that followed his departure from Aspen was deafening. He disappeared from our lives as completely as if he had never been a part of them. Rumors occasionally trickled down through mutual acquaintances. A failed business venture, a mounting pile of debts, a nomadic existence. He had burned through the last of his personal funds, a testament to his reckless spending. The grand illusion he had so carefully constructed had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of his own making. The company, under its new ownership, prospered, a stark reminder of what could have been if ego hadn't overshadowed integrity. Life, as it often does, had a way of balancing the scales. The man who had boasted of others being useless without him was, in the end, the one left with nothing. And the women he had underestimated, the ones he had dismissed, had found their strength, their freedom, and a new, more authentic life, far from the shadows of his self-serving reign. The mountains of Colorado, silent witnesses to that fateful dinner, continued their majestic watch, as new dawns broke over lives irrevocably changed for the better.